The deep, emotionless voice resounded in everyone's heart. They still retained their horrified expressions, but apart from that they could do nothing. The entire timeline was fixed by a terrifying force at this time. Just like the power supply of a filtered fish tank was suddenly turned off, the water circulation in the entire fish tank immediately stopped and turned into a pool of stagnant water. Zhang Yi calmly stared at everything in the fish tank in front of him. With the help of the two Hell Lords, he had already become a being beyond this world. His spirit and soul were horrified at this moment. Enveloped by energy. It is precisely because of this that Zhang Yi was able to drive such a powerful force to complete this unprecedented feat. This is the first time he has observed the world from this perspective. The level he is at this time is even higher than the level outside this world. The two separate real universes are like two bubbles, and they emit various colors, shining with their own starlight. One is starry and full of hope, the other is obscured by dark clouds, like condensed ink. Zhang Yi wanted to reach out and touch the crystal clear barrier, but his instinctive wisdom made him retract this idea. Every world cannot be affected by external factors, and the same is true for the nascent reality. Touching the boundary of reality rashly is like sticking your finger into a fish tank. The microorganisms on your finger will spread in the water without you paying attention. Will such a move, like the chrysalis, become the trigger for contaminating this newly born real world? In silence, Zhang Yi cast his gaze beyond reality. There is a world of nothingness, with no edges and nothing visible. There is no light or darkness, there is just nothingness. Under this scene, even Zhang Yi couldn't help but sigh. What kind of weird existence could drag this real world towards destruction and despair? What kind of weird existence is there that makes observers afraid to look here? When reality was torn apart, Zhang Yi finally had the opportunity to take a peek at that thing. But what Zhang Yi didn't know was that at the moment he separated from reality, all the energy in the bodies of the demon Lord Mephisto and the old ruler Shimagras was burned out in an instant. Not only that, even the dimensions they controlled were affected. The magic of the entire hell border was burning. Countless weak demons and relatives of the old rulers died suddenly in this catastrophe and turned into nothingness. These burned magic powers were transformed into supreme power through the time controller and filled Zhang Yi's spirit, allowing Zhang Yi to shroud his astral projection outside of reality. Countless tentacles of darkness crawled up densely. They were like maggots attached to the bones, lingering and following like a shadow. With just eye contact, the other party could follow the sight and spread. Zhang Yi stretched out his hand, and a layer of green crystal appeared quickly, blocking the tentacles and himself. For an instant, Zhang Yi's huge and majestic figure swayed under this layer of green barrier, and gradually became more and more blurry, and finally turned into an appearance that could not be spied on, like a candlelight in the mirror, water and moon, making people unfathomable. I will trap you here, with this world you have polluted. Zhang Yi spoke slowly, as if mumbling to himself. I still have no way to eliminate the traces left by you and you, but I will find a way. Until then, you can stay here. The struggle of the black tentacles became more obvious. They kept knocking and bombarding the barrier blocking the timeline, trying to find a gap in it. The black insect chrysalis that sucked the light now turned into an existence whose specific figure could not be seen clearly. Countless hair-like tentacles sprouted out densely. They swarmed in, bared their teeth and claws, and rushed toward the green barrier one after another. The first tentacle that came into contact with the barrier made a tingling sound, and then the entire tentacle turned into black smoke as if it was corroded, but this did not stop it, and more tentacles emerged. When it came out, it was accompanied by the tragic and mournful shrill sound. A huge noise roared in, resounding throughout the whole world. It was a language with no meaning at all. Judging from the sound alone, it was enough to be called horrific. It seemed to be a dream language trapped in a nightmare, and it was like a dream. The swan song before the soul is annihilated. This noisy and unknown sound is enough to drive any intelligent creature into madness. It will destroy reason and fill the human brain with other things, turning it into a chaotic monster that does not conform to any logical composition. This sound comes from so far away that no one can detect its source. It seems to come from the distant wilderness, from another dimension, or from behind you. It was born at the center of the world, the origin of the timeline, behind all reality. Zhang Yi knew that at this moment, the chrysalis had completely polluted the timeline, and it refused to give up. It was angry, roaring, and trying its best to make its voice heard by other multiverses. It's trying to pollute other universes. The idea is great, but you can't do it anymore. It is you who drag this world into the endless abyss, and you who try to cover the main universe with a new reality. But it is you who has trapped yourself on this isolated island, and no one can hear your voice. Zhang Yi gently raised his hand to pull up a layer of curtain, covering this layer of reality wrapped in dark green crystals, like covering a decaying coffin. The sound that no one hears is the absence of sound. After doing all this, Zhang Yi raised his head and looked at the timeline that was rising and drifting away following its original route. It caught up with the many dimensions it left behind, and the limbo of hell returned to it. Magical and gorgeous worlds surrounded it, and everything seemed so peaceful. Zhang Yi knew that world was safe. He saved a world, but he also destroyed a world. But no matter which world it is, there is no place for him anymore at this moment. After a moment of silence, Zhang Yi put away his black umbrella and murmured. It's time for us to go, Carla Pietro. Thanks for the tips. Thank you for the tips from book friends A String of Numbers, Xiao Zai, Duja 233, and The Unyielding Brave Man. Thank you all. The endless desolate plains, the ruins of the city extend here, countless rubbles are scattered on this land filled with deathly silence, buried by the lust with the howling cold wind. In the ruins formed by a collapsed building, a bonfire became the only light here. The firelight kept beating, and the shadows reflected on the wall kept twisting and shaking. This is the only bright place in this dead land. Even if the fire is not big, it can still illuminate the darkness and warm people's hearts. Zhang Yi tightened his windbreaker and held a wooden stick in his hand to overturn the firewood in the campfire. Beside him, two young people were lying quietly. It was Pietro and Carla, but they were still in a coma at this time. Zhang Yi also just came to this world. After sealing the contaminated reality, Zhang Yi used his last power to strip Carla and Pietro from two different dimensions of reality. Fortunately, they were not natives of that world and were not too seriously polluted. After Zhang Yi completely blocked the connection between the chrysalis and the outside world, the pollution on their bodies completely disappeared. However, this kind of the rough methods also severely impacted the two people's spirits. As for Mephisto and the old ones, Zhang Yi has not contacted them since everything ended, but Zhang Yi estimates that they have achieved something that satisfies them. As promised before, Zhang Yi only sealed the contaminated timeline, and outside the Earth dimension, outside of that timeline, there are countless unpolluted souls, and in addition to these, the broken world and the fragments of the universe will also be divided up by the two lords. But those things have nothing to do with Zhang Yi anymore. Without the supply of power, he urgently needs to find a world to rest, so he has no choice but to let Miss Time start random travel. It's just that Zhang Yi didn't expect that the time controller would actually send him to such a place this time. No matter how bad the situation in the universe was before, it would have given him time to prepare, but this time, the good guy threw himself directly into the ruins. From the looks of it, it seemed that the crisis of annihilation had already occurred and everything was over. Of course, the reason why Zhang Yi fell back to this point is actually, in a sense, his own fault. Zhang Yi touched the time controller in his arms through his windbreaker and sighed heavily. When he ended that reality and was preparing to leave with the unconscious Pietro and Carla, Zhang Yi suddenly had an idea that he had always wanted to do but didn't dare to do, to check the time controller history. In fact, Zhang Yi has had this doubt for a long time. The secret of the time controller has been lingering in Zhang Yi's mind. Even though it and Miss Time have bound him now, Zhang Yi is still not sure. He hopes to know more. There is a secret behind the time controller. Since the time controller appeared in the ruined universe for unknown reasons, then he who has taken control of the ruined universe can completely search the timeline of that universe to see how the time controller appeared. Originally, this was just an idea, because Zhang Yi also knew that he was not very strong. Anyone with a discerning eye knew that there was a huge secret hidden behind the time controller, and there were corresponding indescribable dangers. So at that time, Zhang Yi had to hide this question in your heart and don't show it. But things changed later. Zhang Yi, who had mastered power outside the real dimension, could feel the terrifying energy he controlled at that time. Every move he made would cause the reality to collapse and the planet to be annihilated. With the blessing of this powerful energy, Zhang Yi's deep thoughts emerged again. He wanted to know the origin of the time controller. He wanted to know who the previous owner of this thing was and how it appeared in the ruins. In the universe. However, just such a move almost detonated the entire ruined universe. It was as if someone had punched a hole in the balloon. The original ruined universe did not have any magical energy. The entire universe was extremely dry and everything was in a state of no vitality. However, Zhang Yi's line of sight brought countless amounts of energy with complicated information. Logically speaking, this energy cannot be seen or touched, and it will not have any impact on the multiverse. But the strange thing is that this energy, a burst of energy, unexpectedly quickly filled the ruined universe and expanded it like a balloon. It was at this time that the danger of the hole appeared. The history of the time controller seemed to have been deliberately erased. The blank historical holes were constantly torn apart on this timeline and were about to begin to collapse. Seeing this, Zhang Yi could only retract his gaze and use up all his energy to fill the gap. Fortunately, Zhang Yi reacted in time and blocked the nearly collapsed gap with more violent magic energy, avoiding the ruins. The universe is out of control. It was also because of this that Zhang Yi ended up in his current state and entered a more dangerous universe. However, Zhang Yi's actions were not fruitless. In his sudden glance, he saw a vague fragment from outside time and history, and in that fragment, he vaguely saw a pair of eyes. Those were a pair of eyes that Zhang Yi could not forget. Zhang Yi could not remember the color of the pupils of those eyes, nor could he remember anything else except those eyes, as if everything was a dream. Zhang Yi, who was awake, could only remember the existence of those eyes and the surprise they exuded. Who owns those eyes? Is the other party the previous user of the time controller? Or maybe the other party is something even more unspeakable hidden under the ruins of the universe, and you are surprised that you can discover its existence. Zhang Yi didn't know any of these, but what he knew was that these were by no means what he could know now. If he wanted to understand those secrets, he needed to master more powerful power. Well. Pietro's moan instantly attracted Zhang Yi's attention. You're awake. I thought Kara would wake up earlier than you. Don't underestimate my super speed. Pietro sat up tremblingly. He refused Zhang Yi's help and asked. Is there anything to eat? I'm going to starve to death. It's been prepared a long time ago. Zhang Yi took out some fast food from his magic space, basically donuts, hamburgers or fried dumplings. Originally, these things were supposed to be stored in the bottomless pit universe, but after Zhang Yi threw Deadpool's contaminated head into it, he had no idea about it. He was afraid that the things he put in would also be contaminated. Later, Zhang Yi also threw the sealed timeline into it, making the bottomless pit universe completely unusable. Fortunately, as a wizard, it is easy to open up a small space of your own, just like Doctor Strange or Loki. Although the volume is not large, it is more convenient. After taking the food, Pietro immediately couldn't help being hungry and started eating. While eating, Pietro asked. Where are Moon Knight and the others? They are still alive, living in their own universe. Zhang Yi said calmly. What did you do? I feel like I've lost part of my memory. Pietro rubbed his head. You have not lost your memory. You have passed out. Your spirits cannot withstand the force of crossing the barrier of reality when you are awake. This is what I must do if I want to save you. Zhang Yi replied. So that's it. Pietro nodded, and then asked again. Then where is this place? This is a new time, and this is the world we will live in for a while. Zhang Yi looked at Pietro who was devouring his food, heaved a sigh of relief and smiled. Don't worry, it's safe here. Pietro stopped chewing. Look around. You fart. P.S. You will never guess what universe it is, forget it, it shouldn't be difficult to guess. After being choked by Pietro, Zhang Yi couldn't help but shook his head and cursed with a smile. Eat quickly, there are so many things that can't stop your mouth. That's right. Every time you tell me it's safe, we will face a particularly serious crisis, and it gets bigger every time. At this point, Pietro became even more excited, pointing to the ruins not far away. Said. Look at that. Before, we were still teleporting to the trash can. Now, we ran directly to the garbage dump. The environment here is like a missile plowing the ground. Are you telling me that it is safe here? Okay, I admit, there are indeed some problems with my wording. Zhang Yi touched his earlobe, and then focused his attention on the bonfire in front of him again. What I mean is that we are safe for now. I have not sensed any signs of strange life nearby. If there is not something wrong with my magic, then this means that there is no longer any life in this ruins. A living thing. Can you still use magic? I mean, can you still be as powerful as before? To be honest, you were so handsome before. That figure that filled the entire sky scared me. Jumping? Pietro raised his head and asked curiously. Hearing this, Zhang Yi stretched out his hand and snapped his fingers. The next moment, the color of the bonfire instantly turned dark green, and as Zhang Yi's fingers beat rhythmically, the green firelight illuminated the two people's faces. His face looked particularly strange in the middle of the night. There is no problem in using simple magic. After all, I didn't just mess around in those 17 years. However, there is something wrong with the source of my magic power. In order to avoid any unknown accidents in that world, it is difficult for me to continue to use magic now. That dimension takes in energy. As Zhang Yi spoke, a blurry image of those eyes flashed through his mind. The ruined universe caused indelible consequences due to his operational errors. Although the opening was blocked, for the sake of safety, Zhang Yi decided not to have too much contact with the ruined universe in the future after communicating with Miss Time. Unless you have enough strength to reveal the secret behind it all. For this reason, Zhang Yi thought that he should record a new timeline next and use it as his trump card and backup magic energy. In the previous worlds, disasters struck too quickly and did not give Zhang Yi enough time to record. This also caused Zhang Yi to miss two worlds that were very suitable for him to use as supplies, but things are different now. This world has been shrouded in the shadow of doomsday. Long before Zhang Yi came here, the earth here had turned into scorched earth. The haze of war covered every corner here. Scavenging vultures hovered high in the sky. This, dirty, they never lack food. Just like a ruined universe, this world has no hope, or in other words, those hopes are too slim compared to the despair that envelopes this wasteland. We are forced to land in this world. Logically speaking, this universe should be similar to the universe we were in before. It belongs to the same parallel universe line. Moreover, I can use magic here smoothly and there is no hindrance from other rules. This it should also corroborate my guess. So there is another me in this world? Pietro asked casually. I heard Moonlight Knight say before that Pietro in that world has been sacrificed, and died in the hands of Deadpool. His death was extremely miserable. This result surprised Pietro because he couldn't figure it out no matter how hard he thought about it. The world self is obviously a speedster, why was he hacked to death with a knife? This. Zhang Yi took a deep breath, cast his gaze to the ruins in the distance, paused, and then murmured. I really can't guarantee this. Pietro's expression was wonderful. There is no way, Zhang Yi really can't guarantee this, because as a speedster, even if Pietro does not have the ability to travel through the timeline and modify history, his ability is still very strong, so when encountering major events, Quicksilver will always just like the Flash, they died hand in hand on the way to sacrifice to heaven. They say that if you want to be safe, the weather is sunny. Looking at the environment in this wasteland, Pietro in this world is probably already cold. No, is my fate in the parallel universe so bad? Zhang, I can't even imagine what kind of fate I would have suffered in that world if you hadn't rescued me. Pietro couldn't help but sneered. Cold War. Don't think so much. I can't blame you. In a normal universe, although we will encounter various crises, heroes will still unite to solve difficulties. It's just that maybe we are unlucky, I always come to this kind of universe. Zhang Yi smiled bitterly. I don't think we were unlucky, Pietro said suddenly. When Zhang Yi heard this, he raised his head and looked at Pietro with interest. Pietro, on the other hand, looked at Zhang Yi seriously. I think our journey is meaningful. It's not that we come to these worlds, but that these worlds need us. Zhang Yi was stunned. This was the first time he saw Pietro so serious. It seemed that this kid had experienced so many things and had grown up a bit. Recalling the time when the two of them met for the first time, this kid was still fighting for food with wild dogs, Zhang Yi couldn't help but feel a little bitter in his heart. Maybe only those who have experienced despair can be better able to taste it with other people. Have sympathy for those who are suffering. Is this why only people who have been caught in the rain will hold an umbrella for others? Zhang Yi laughed dumbly. Boy, I'm really not used to your sudden seriousness. Pietro didn't know what Zhang Yi was thinking. He just felt that the conclusion he came to made Zhang Yi smile. This obviously meant that Zhang Yi didn't care about what he said at all, and the other party even thought he was joking. Zhang, I'm serious. We have experienced 3 universes together, and this is the 4th one. You really haven't thought carefully about the reasons behind these events. Pietro. Zhang Yi spoke, interrupting Pietro's words. He smiled and looked at Pietro who was anxiously explaining his thoughts, and spoke word by word. It's good that you are kind. It's also good that you can remain optimistic even after experiencing and witnessing countless painful things. I hope you can continue to do so. The atmosphere froze for a few seconds. Why are you saying your last words? Pietro's eyes changed when he looked at Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi's mouth twitched when he heard this. Fuck you. How long have I been unconscious? After Pietro finished eating the 37th takeaway package, Kara's eyelashes trembled slightly and she slowly opened her eyes. More than an hour later than me. Pietro smiled. Seeing that Carla finally woke up, his worried mood improved a lot. Want to eat something? I told you these fried dumplings are delicious, Zhang, are you right? Indeed, but there are not many left. Since this fast food restaurant is now in another time and space, it will probably be a little difficult for you to eat in the future. Zhang Yi shrugged. Wait, Zhang, don't tell me these foods come from that polluted world. Pietro was shocked. Yes. Zhang Yi nodded. Ah. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Pietro was so frightened that he quickly grabbed his throat, fearing that there were some unknown contaminants remaining on these foods. Looking at this scene, Kara's face showed a smile unconsciously. She was still a little dizzy when she woke up from the coma, but when she looked at Zhang Yi and Pietro, who were fighting, all the confusion in her heart disappeared. Kara didn't know how long it had been since she had experienced this feeling, the feeling of having her family by her side when she woke up every day. Stop it, Pietro, it's disgusting. I still need to eat. Kara climbed up from the sheets on the ground and came to the side of the bonfire. Although as a Kryptonian, her body was immune to the cold and heat, but at this moment, she wanted to get closer to the bonfire. You're crazy. There might be pollution up there. Pietro turned around. Idiot, he lied to you. Kara couldn't help but tear open a new box of takeout. Hearing this, Pietro's eyes widened in disbelief, and he stared at Zhang Yi in astonishment, as if he couldn't believe that Zhang Yi was actually playing tricks on him. In response, Zhang Yi just spread his hands. I didn't expect you to react so strongly. What's wrong with the superbrain? I'll fight you. Pietro picked up his own scepter of Zeus. Okay, stop making trouble. You are such an adult, and you still say that your mental age is older than mine. To me, you look like a 15-year-old child. Kara said. Since Kara arrived on Earth when she was 15 years old, and was directly imprisoned by the Maoist government for several years, during this period of time, she had no contact with society, and her behavior was still at the stage of 15 years old. It is precisely because in this way, Pietro often tricked her into calling him brother. But to be honest, after staying in that dark place for so long, Kara may not know much about social interactions, but her actual mental endurance is definitely not something ordinary people can match. A man is a boy until he dies, Zhang taught me that, Pietro replied. Hearing this, Kara turned to look at Zhang Yi. Feeling Kara's gaze, Zhang Yi hurriedly spoke. He got it wrong. After playing around for a while, Zhang Yi also told Carla the whole story. During that battle, Carla and Pietro had completely different perspectives. If Pietro witnessed the fall of the polluted reality head-on, then Carla undoubtedly witnessed the birth of a new reality with her own eyes. At that time, she was fighting Magneto. Kara would not hold back just because her opponent was an old man. Magneto had never met Kara. In order to protect his mutant criminals, he did not hesitate to use all his strength to fight Kara. On one side was the Kryptonian with a body of steel, and on the other was Magneto, who controlled the magnetic field. The battle between the two sides directly destroyed half of Manhattan. As the seen man, Magneto raised his hand, and all objects that could be magnetized became his weapons. In an instant, steel bars and high-rise buildings were hovering in the sky, and the car became a hidden weapon wielded by Magneto. Even if they were far apart, ordinary people across the coast could see the scene of their battle. It was also at that time that the world was reshaped bit by bit, and a new reality was about to be born. But before that new timeline appeared, everything in the original reality was repelled by an unstoppable force. In the gaps of reality. The world is torn apart, the sea water is pouring in, and everything in reality is falling apart. Kara's last memory was the moment and a huge hand covering the entire sky reached out to her. She closed her eyes without any resistance because she felt very at ease. Of course, for some unknown reason, Kara, who had regained consciousness, had an inexplicable idea in her mind, which was to ask Zhang Yi to change into better gloves. Leather ones were too uncomfortable. Can your thing still work? It looks broken. Kara asked curiously as her eyes shifted to the Zeus scepter placed next to Pietro. The capacitor and transformer are burned out. They should be able to be repaired. This thing can help me practice my skills. I am planning to specialize in technology recently. After all, it would be a waste to have a super brain if it is not used properly. Pietro replied. Besides, I have a vibranium arm now, which is enough. Super brain. Kara murmured, obviously she should be a scientist on Krypton. Seeing Kara lost in thought, Zhang Yi couldn't help but speak. Kara, you can also try to do some research or something. You don't have to be overwhelmed by the many skills. If you have such a gift as a super brain, you must learn to use it. Don't be like your brother. Carl. What happened to him? Kara was stunned for a moment, she didn't understand why the topic suddenly turned to her cousin. Seeing this, Zhang Yi had no choice but to tell her a joke about Superman. Kara, you know, every time your brother Superman thinks about how to defeat his enemies, his super brain will tell him, use your superpower quickly. Pfft, Pietro covered his mouth. Kara also fell into silence, biting her lip to suppress her smile. This is actually a joke. The reason is because Superman is too strong. In the face of his invincible power, he doesn't need to think too much at all, because those enemies are not worthy of letting him spend such meaningless efforts. But, what I'm trying to say is, Kryptonians aren't invincible, right? Yeah. Kara put away her smile. I gained a lot in the last world. There are many very powerful beings among the people on Earth. And when faced with some higher-level beings, the Kryptonian's physique is just a durable toy. So, in order for us to live a good life, we still have to have enough strength. Speaking of this, Zhang Yi seemed to be thinking about something and asked again. By the way, Kara, how do you feel now? Are you still familiar with the sun in this world? Hearing this, Kara clenched her fists and pondered for a moment before slowly raising her head and speaking. Maybe it's because it's night at this time, and I can't feel the changes in the sun in this world. But for now, my strength is probably partially weakened. The multiverses are all different, and even parallel universes that are similar will still have some slight differences. This is particularly evident on the sun of this world. The sun has always represented hope and glory in human history. Its light spreads all over the earth, and darkness has nowhere to hide. In a bright world, everything seems to be so beautiful, and people are carefree, happy, and peaceful. But in this world, perhaps reflecting the wasteland of the earth, the sun in the sky actually looks old. It is different from all the suns in Zhang Yi's impression. When he looked at the rising sun at this time, an idiom emerged in my mind unconsciously, candles in the wind. Looking at the sun that originally represented hope, Zhang Yi felt very complicated. That thing was like a match burning itself desperately at the moment, trying to illuminate the land in front of him before it went out, trying hard to give this land the land brings some warmth and light. My previous guess was correct. In this world, I seem to be unable to exert my due fighting power. Kara frowned and stared at the rising sun. For some reason, this sun made her very uncomfortable, whether it was physically or psychologically. To what extent has it been weakened? Zhang Yi asked flatly. Half as before, I guess. Kara thought for a moment and replied. I can release heat vision, but the destructive power is limited. I can use the biological stance, but I can't fly. As for the other things, I'm not sure yet. It's acceptable. At least you still have a certain ability to protect yourself. The sun in this world is older than I thought. Obviously this is not a normal thing. Zhang Yi withdrew his gaze and turned around, continued to speak to Carla and Pietro. For the sake of safety, I hope you can try not to use your abilities. We don't understand the world well enough. Exposing yourself rashly may bring us unprecedented danger. Kara heard this and nodded immediately. At this time, she had lost half of her strength, which also gave her a slight sense of crisis. Understood, I will also act according to the plan. Pietro on the side also spoke. Having experienced the desperate ruins of the universe, Pietro naturally understood how important it is to follow orders. Seriously, Zhang, I really feel like going home when I come here. The three of them simply packed up and hit the road. Nothing useful can be found in this ruins filled with yellow sand. Next, they must look for some clues about this world to understand why the Earth in this universe has become what it is now. In fact, for Zhang Yi, who has read a lot of superhero comics, he is naturally familiar with this wasteland-style scene. Whether it is Marvel or DC, such unique scenes often appear. The more famous comic scene is Batman holding a lantern made of the clown's head, walking in the yellow sand looking for all hope in the wasteland, but since this universe belongs to Marvel, for Zhang Yi, basically half of the plot in my mind can be eliminated. In fact, Zhang Yi really had some guesses about this universe, because the original work was so famous, but before people who had come into contact with this world, Zhang Yi really couldn't tell whether his guesses were right or wrong. Walking in the desert, Zhang Yi and the three of them all wore robes, not only to protect themselves from the wind and sand, but also to hide their identities. Fortunately, Zhang Yi and Kara are not characters from the Marvel Multiverse, but Pietro is different. He is Quicksilver, a member of the Avengers, and a majestic superhero. His existence will have attracted the attention of many interested people, if anyone really recognized him. The speed of the three of them was very fast. In just one morning, Zhang Yi and the others crossed the entire desert and arrived at a dilapidated small town with a very Western style. On the surface, this place looks like an abandoned village. It is located in the wilderness. The houses are dilapidated, and some of the windows and doors are broken. It is extremely desolate. If it weren't for a few drunkards sleeping on the filthy road, it would be difficult for Zhang Yi to define this place as a sanctuary. Finally, it's still somewhat popular. I used to wonder if there were no survivors in this world. Pietro lowered the brim of his hood and muttered quietly. As they walked through the desert, the three of them saw no sign of life, just like a forbidden area of death. This place may be worse than we imagined. Kara looked at the dilapidated town in front of her, without any law at all, and couldn't help but frown. By chance, the wind and sand passed by, and a promotional poster flew in the wind, whizzing past the heads of Zhang Yi and the others. Zhang Yi raised his head slightly and stretched out his hand. The next moment, the promotional poster in mid-air was pulled by some invisible force, circled in the sky, and landed steadily in Zhang Yi's hand. There were various women in scantily clad clothing printed on the poster. It looked like it was a nightclub poster. In the center of the flyer, there was a huge eyeball printed on it, which seemed to be the nightclub's logo. It's hard to imagine that in such a desolate and barren place, someone would actually build a nightclub dedicated to pleasure. You must know that in the wasteland, all kinds of resources are extremely scarce, and it is already difficult for ordinary people to survive here. Looking deeply at the poster in his hand, Zhang Yi's dusty memories gradually awakened. After practicing magic, Zhang Yi's mental power can easily improve his memory ability. Sure enough, it's just as I guessed. How should I put it? Is it worthy of being a wasteland? Exhaling slowly, Zhang Yi smiled, but this smile was full of ridicule. Zhang, are you planning to go here? Pietro looked at Zhang Yi, who had been staring at the poster of the nightclub, and smiled with an unknown meaning. He was speechless for a moment. I'm going to take a look here. Zhang Yi replied calmly without denying this. At this point, even Kara couldn't help but roll her eyes. What's wrong? Zhang Yi stopped thinking. After being stunned for a moment, he didn't understand why Pietro and Carla had such a big reaction. We are in the wasteland, and there are dangers everywhere. We finally arrived at a populated place, and the first thing you thought of was to find that. I'm embarrassed to say it. Pietro said. What responded to him was Zhang Yi's gentle slap on the back of his head. Don't tarnish my image in front of Kara. This is usually a good place to collect intelligence. It's not like you haven't been with me before. Have you forgotten about Nick Fury? Don't be pretentious. The name of this nightclub is very interesting. Sudden Flowers and Eyes. It is not too difficult to find its location. It is located in the center of the town. At the same time, it is also the most prosperous area in the town and the center of power. It can also be seen from this that the boss behind this nightclub is quite powerful. Without the support of strong enough people, it is absolutely impossible to establish this kind of industry here. Pushing open the door and entering the lobby of the nightclub, soon you are greeted by a dark environment and strong drum beats. Along with it came the pungent smell of alcohol and perfume. Zhang Yi frowned slightly and looked around the entire hall. He found that this place was said to be a nightclub, but in fact it was more like a bar. It also used an old Western style, but the interior decoration was quite trendy, and it had a sense of two eras. A different kind of beauty created by impact. Dynamic lights flashed in the dim environment. The light was not dazzling, but on the contrary, it made people feel comfortable. After listening to the restless music for a long time, I became addicted to it and couldn't extricate myself. In the bar, mercenaries in strange clothes sat together in twos and threes, drinking and chatting with each other. From time to time, their eyes looked at the beautiful girls on the stage, looking at their bodies with lustful eyes. Following their line of sight, Zhang Yi and the others finally saw the scenery above the stage. I saw tall, young and beautiful girls, under the bright lights, twisting their seductive bodies and performing obsessive dance steps, exuding their own charm crazily and teasing the audience. The men could no longer control their restless hearts. The fair skin is particularly eye-catching under the light, and the charming faces are even more eye-catching. Every move of the girls will make the men present intoxicated, as if their hearts have been anesthetized for a long time. However, although most of the guests here seem to have some evil intentions, at this moment, no one has done anything presumptuous. They will look at the girls hungrily, but they will never take advantage of them while they are drunk. After all, those strong men standing in the corner of the bar are not decorations. They have long been tired of playing with these beautiful girls. Those who can work here will not be much worse off in terms of wealth. They are like the guards guarding the king, guarding this wonderful place in a strange and confusing atmosphere. Zhang, did I see it wrong? I don't know how long it took before Pietro came back to his senses from his shock. He looked at the sexy girls dancing seductively on the stage and said with some stuttering. You read that right. Zhang Yi knew what Pietro's words meant. At this moment, the girls on the stage were wearing nothing but all kinds of superhero suits. Scarlet Witch, Captain Marvel, Black Widow, Spider-Woman. All the heroines you can imagine can find corresponding roles here. If you don't see the heroine in your memory here, then she is probably in the bed of another man now. Oh my God. Pietro took a deep breath. He just felt that his head was a little dizzy now. He had imagined seeing those familiar heroes in this world, but Pietro swore that this was definitely not what he meant. I know now, Zhang, what you meant when you said before, they are no longer the heroes in your memory. Kara on the side was in a bad state after seeing this scene. In the previously polluted universe, Kara was happiest every day watching comics and stories about superheroes. For her, these heroes, that's her role model. Don't get me wrong, these are ordinary people. They are not the heroes you remember. Zhang Yi put his arms around Carla and Pietro. He was afraid that these two little guys would tear this place apart in the next second. The fact was just as Zhang Yi expected. After hearing Zhang Yi's words, Kara suddenly felt infinite anger in her heart. She would not allow anyone to insult those heroines, let alone their reputations be tarnished. But being held by Zhang Yi, Kara didn't want to hurt Zhang Yi by breaking away, so she could only suppress the anger in her heart and lowered her head without saying a word. What do you do? A strong man who looked like a security guard or a waiter came over, looked at Zhang Yi and the others with an unkind expression, and asked. Perhaps this is the fearlessness of those who don't know. This strong man obviously didn't know what kind of existence he was talking to. We passed by here on a business trip. We heard that there are a lot of fun things here, so we came to relax. Zhang Yi raised his head and showed a smile. In his sleeve, Zhang Yi crumpled the leaflet. A ball. Then, Zhang Yi raised his arm, and in his hand, a gold nugget shone brightly under the light. How about making it easier? Seeing the gold, the strong man's expression improved. He stepped aside and led Zhang Yi and the others to an empty wine table. He brought a box of beer over and invited the three of them to sit down. There is a list on the table. You can tell me what you want to eat or drink. You can also tell me which girl you like. She can come over and have a drink with you. Of course, if you want to have a good time, I will also arrange it for you. Room, or if you want to play here, it's up to you. Click. The wine bottle Kara just held in her hand shattered on the floor. The strong man was stunned for a moment, his face uncertain. Don't worry about him, this guy has strong hands. Zhang Yi explained casually, and then said with a smile. Girl, let's stop looking for you now. Let's bring some food. Have a portion of everything on the list. I'm quite hungry. After staring at Zhang Yi for a while, the strong man nodded, turned and left. Zhang, why are you stopping me? The moment the strong man left, Kara couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Kara, you have a lot to learn. Let's start with controlling your emotions. Zhang Yi calmly handed a new bottle of beer to Kara. How? Hearing this, Kara gritted her teeth and didn't say much. She just silently took the beer and took a big sip. On the other side, the strong man leaving was playing with the gold in his hand and humming to the music as he walked to the kitchen. Business has been getting worse and worse during this time. It is rare to see customers who are as generous as this time. The strong man is going to order the kitchen to bring out the best things to entertain these guests. After all, it is their last meal. Naturally more abundant. At this moment, a voice suddenly stopped him. Stop, what are you holding? The strong man trembled when he heard this. He turned around and looked at a strange being with a human body but an eyeball on his head, and replied tremblingly. Boss, this is a tip from a customer outside. Tip? The eyeball monster showed a weird look. He looked at the paper ball in the strong man's hand worriedly.